The scream came from the tree line just before dusk, and I was over the fence before I finished deciding to move. Not a scream, exactly. A pup's cry, thin and panicked, the kind that unravels something in the chest of anyone who has ever loved a small creature. I had lived at the edge of Coppervale long enough to know the difference between a fox's bark and a wolf pup's terror, and this was terror. I found them in the hollow beneath the split oak, where the roots had grown up out of the ground like the ribs of something buried too shallow. The pup was gray and trembling, one back leg bent wrong, blood matting the fur at its shoulder. And standing over it, black as the space between stars, was the wolf every soul in these hills had learned to fear. I had heard the story since I was a girl grown. The great black alpha that ran the ridges alone, that answered to no pack, that had torn through 3 separate attempts by King Merrick's own men to collar it, to bind it, to bring it under the crown's authority the way all wild wolves of Coppervale were eventually brought. They said it had killed for less than a wrong step. They said even the king himself, the strongest alpha this territory had known in 2 generations, could not make it kneel. It did not look like a legend now. It looked like a mother who was not a mother, guarding a child who was not its own, out of options, out of time, and bleeding from a gash along its ribs that told me it had fought something larger to reach this pup first. I had come to Coppervale's edge 7 years before, after my own mother died and left me the cottage and the bee skeps and little else, and I had built a small, quiet life out of honey and herbs, and the particular solitude of a woman who has stopped waiting for anyone to need her. The village below thought me strange for it. A woman alone at the wild border with no husband and no wolf-pack loyalty to speak of, content among hives and goats and the company of her own thoughts. I did not correct them. There was a peace in being overlooked that I had come to prize the way other women prized attention, and I had told myself more than once that I wanted nothing else from my remaining years than exactly this, quiet and usefulness, and the company of creatures who never demanded I be anything other than steady. I did not run. My grandmother had kept bees for 40 years, and she had taught me the only rule that mattered with any creature large enough to kill you. You do not move like prey, and you do not move like a threat. You simply become something the animal does not need to solve. So I knelt, right there at the tree line a good 10 paces back, my hands open and empty on my knees, and I said nothing at all. The wolf's head came up. Eyes like struck flint found mine in the failing light, and I felt the full weight of them the way you feel a storm arrive before the first drop falls. Not fear exactly, but a recalibration of the air itself. I did not look away, and I did not look at the pup. I only knelt there, small and patient, until the color went out of the sky and the cold came up through my skirts from the ground, and still the wolf watched me, and still I did not move first. When true dark fell, I rose slowly, said, "I will come back," to a creature that could not understand my words and might not care if it did, and I walked home with my heart going like a hammer against a locked door. I did not sleep that night, or not properly. I lay awake turning the wolf's eyes over in my mind the way you turn a coin you cannot spend, and somewhere near dawn I admitted to myself what I had been too proud to admit at the tree line, that I meant to go back not once but every night the pup needed tending, whatever that cost me in scraped nerves and cold-numbed knees. And that some part of this decision had very little to do with the pup at all, and a great deal to do with the way the wolf had looked at me, as though I were the first uncertain thing he had ever troubled himself to consider twice. I came back the next evening with a rabbit I had snared that morning, though I did not bring it to the wolf. I set it on a flat stone a full 20 paces from the hollow, in plain sight, and then I knelt again at my same distance and waited. The wolf did not touch the rabbit. It watched me the entire time, its great body curved protectively around the injured pup, and when the moon rose high enough to silver its black coat to something like wet ink, I saw the wound along its ribs had scabbed but not closed, saw the way it favored one side when it shifted to keep the pup warm against its flank. It needed help. It would not ask, and it would not accept help offered as if I were owed something for it. So I offered nothing. I only knelt, and I stayed until the cold drove me home again, and I told myself this was not foolishness, though I could not have said with certainty that it was not. The village had its own opinion of my nightly walks by the third day, as villages always do. Old Mr. Pharaoh at the mill told me plainly I would be found in pieces by week's end, and the miller's wife pressed a sprig of dried rowan into my palm for protection, which I accepted with more grace than I felt, because I did not think rowan had ever yet talked a hungry animal out of its hunger, and I did not believe, in any case, that hunger was what I was dealing with in that hollow beneath the split oak. What I had seen in the wolf's eyes was not hunger. It was vigilance grown so old, and so lonely it had forgotten there was any other way to hold itself. On the fourth night, Merrick found me. I heard him before I saw him, the particular hush that falls over a wood when something with authority enters it, birds going quiet, the wind itself seeming to step aside. I did not turn from my place at the tree line, because I did not want the wolf to think my attention had wandered, but I felt him arrive the way you feel a hearth fire at your back on a winter night, warmth and weight both. "You should not be here," he said, low, so as not to startle either of us. "That animal has taken the hand off a man twice your size." "He has not taken anything from me," I said. "He has only watched me kneel." I heard him crouch beside me, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched, and when I finally glanced sideways, I understood at once why every story in these hills spoke his name with a kind of reluctant reverence. King Merrick was built like something the land itself had decided to make an example of, broad through the shoulder, dark-haired, a jaw that looked as though it had never once trembled, and yet the eyes he turned on the wounded wolf across the clearing were not a king's eyes. They were tired. They were the eyes of a man who had tried and failed at something for a very long time, and had stopped pretending otherwise. "I have hunted this ridge for 6 years trying to bring that wolf under my protection," he said. "I have left it meat. I have left it shelter. I have sent my gentlest trackers, men who could calm a wounded stallion with their bare hands. It has let none of them within 30 paces. He looked at me properly then, and something in his expression sharpened, curious rather than commanding. "You are within 20. "I am not trying to bring him anywhere," I said. "I am only trying to help the pup." "That is the difference, I think," he murmured, more to himself than to me, and did not explain further. We knelt together at the tree line until the cold became unbearable, and when I rose to leave, he rose with me, and walked me the short way home through the dark without once suggesting I owed him thanks for it, which I noticed, and did not forget. "You are not at all what I expected of a king," I told him, when we reached my gate, mostly because the silence between us had gone on long enough that I felt I ought to fill some part of it. "What did you expect?" "Someone louder," I said, and he laughed once, low and surprised, as though the sound had escaped him before he'd decided to permit it. "I am loud enough with my own pack," he said. "Loud is easy, among wolves who already trust you. It is a different matter entirely with one who does not." He paused at the edge of my lantern light, half in shadow, half out of it, and something in his face went thoughtful in a way that made him look, briefly, less like the subject of village stories and more like a man puzzling over something that mattered to him privately. "I find I would rather learn to be quiet in the right way than go on being loud in the wrong one. You will think that strange, coming from a king." "I think it is the least strange thing you have said to me tonight," I told him, and left him standing there while I latched my door, though I confess I watched him through the shutter crack a moment longer than was strictly necessary before he turned and walked back toward the ridge. The nights piled up like stones stacked one on another into something with shape. 5 nights, then 8. I brought food I did not offer directly. I brought clean water in a shallow dish I set at the same stone each time, a little closer, never crossing the invisible boundary the wolf had drawn between us without either of us naming it. I learned the rhythm of him, How he lay when the pain in his ribs was worst. How his ears swiveled toward me first before they swiveled toward any other sound in the wood. How, on the 6th night, he let his eyes close for the length of 10 breaths while I was there, which was the first time I understood he had begun, in some private ledger of his own, to count me as something other than a danger to be watched without rest. Merrick came most nights too, though he kept his distance from me as scrupulously as I kept mine from the wolf, as if he had decided the same rules that governed my approach to the animal ought to govern his approach to me. I found I did not mind his company in the dark. He did not fill the silence with talk the way some men do when quiet unsettles them. He simply knelt, some paces behind me and to the side, and watched, and once, when the wind turned sharp and cruel out of the north, he shrugged out of his own heavy cloak and settled it over my shoulders without a word, and returned to his place before I could either thank him or refuse. "Why does it matter to you," I asked him on the 9th night, "whether this one wolf trusts you? You are king of every pack in Coppervale. Surely one wild alpha's opinion costs you nothing to lose." He was quiet long enough that I thought he might not answer. "Because he is the only wolf in my territory who has never once bowed to me," he said finally. "Not from cruelty. I do not think he bows to anyone or anything or ever has. And I have spent 6 years wondering what it would take to be the exception, and 6 years failing to be it." He glanced at me sideways, and there was no envy in his voice, only a kind of wonder that seemed to cost him something to admit aloud. "You have been at this 9 nights, and he already sleeps in front of you." "He does not sleep in front of you. He has never once closed his eyes while I was within sight of him," Merrick said. "Not in 6 years." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing, and the two of us knelt together in the cold and watched a wolf breathe, and something about the shape of that silence felt larger than it should have for such a small, plain thing. There were nights in that stretch when nothing at all happened, and I have come to think those were the nights that mattered most. The wolf did not draw closer. The pup did not improve. Frost came early and rimed the bracken silver, and I knelt in it anyway, my knees aching, my breath a pale ribbon in the dark, and I said not one word of complaint because I understood without needing it explained to me that the waiting itself was the offering. Any fool can be patient once, when patience is rewarded quickly. It is a harder thing to kneel in the cold on the nights when nothing answers you at all, and mean it just the same as you meant it the night before. Merrick understood this without my saying it, which surprised me more than it should have. On the coldest of those still nights, when the wolf had not so much as lifted his head in an hour, I heard the king let out a long breath beside me, not of impatience but of something gentler, almost rueful. "I used to think trust was a door," he said quietly, "that you simply found the right key and it opened, and after that it stayed open. I have hunted this ridge long enough to know now that it is not a door at all. It is closer to a garden. It wants tending on the days it shows nothing for the tending, or it will not bear anything at all on the days you finally need it to." "That is a very unkinglike thing to have learned," I said. "It is the only useful thing I have learned in 6 years," he answered, and there was no bitterness in it, only a kind of hard-won honesty that I found I respected more than any show of strength he might have offered instead. The pup's leg was healing crooked. I could see it plainly by the 10th night, the way the limb had begun to knit at a wrong angle that would leave the creature lame if it were not set properly, and soon. I brought 2 flat sticks and a strip of soft cloth the next evening, laid them on the flat stone as I had laid the food and the water, and then I did the hardest thing I had done in 10 nights of hard things. I did not wait for the wolf to come to me. I moved myself 3 paces closer than I ever had to the very edge of the boundary he had drawn, and I said, very quietly into the dark, "I would like to help him walk again. I will need to be closer than this. I will go slowly, and if you tell me no, I will stop, and I will not try again tonight." The wolf's ears came forward. His whole body had gone very still, the particular stillness of a creature deciding, and I felt Merrick go still beside me too, off in the dark behind my shoulder, though I did not turn to look at him. I moved one pace. The wolf did not growl, did not shift the pup away from me, only watched with that flint-struck gaze fixed entirely on my hands, which I kept low and open and slow. I moved a second pace, then a third, until I was close enough to smell the copper of old blood and the green smell of pine sap on his coat, close enough to see that his eyes, up near, were not simply dark but held a deep amber ring around the black, like a coal that had not quite gone out. I knelt beside the pup. The wolf did not move. I set the splint as gently as my hands knew how, murmuring nonsense the whole while, the same low words my grandmother had murmured over frightened animals my whole childhood. And when I finished and sat back on my heels, the great black wolf lowered his head, slow and deliberate, and touched his nose once briefly to the back of my wrist. It was such a small thing, a breath of contact gone before I had finished feeling it. And yet something in me cracked open at the root, quiet and total, like ice giving way beneath still water. No sound at all until you are already standing in the cold of it. Behind me, I heard Merrick make a sound I had not heard a king make before, not a word, barely even breath, as though something in his chest had been struck a single clean blow and was still ringing from it. I turned to find him staring at me, the way a man stares at a light he has been walking toward for years without ever quite believing he would arrive. "What," I asked, "is that look?" "I have felt nothing like this in my life," he said, and his voice had gone rough in a way it had not been before. Not fear, not triumph. As if a door I did not know was locked in me has simply opened, without asking, and now I cannot imagine it ever closing again. He shook his head slowly, as if trying to clear water from his ears. "That wolf let you touch him." "He let me help," I said. "There is a difference." "I know," Merrick said. "That is precisely the difference I have been failing to understand for 6 years, and you have just shown it to me in 11 nights, without trying to show me anything at all." He came forward then, slowly, respectfully, the way I had taught him without meaning to teach him anything, and knelt on my other side, near enough that the wolf could see him plainly, near enough that I felt the warmth of him along my arm. The wolf watched Merrick come. His hackles did not rise. His ears did not flatten. He only watched, the way he had watched me on the very first night, weighing something invisible, and then, to my astonishment and I think to Merrick's disbelief, he did not retreat. Merrick did not reach for him. That, I think, was the whole of what mattered, that a man with 6 years of failed longing behind him could kneel within arm's reach of the thing he had wanted so badly to touch, and keep his hands folded quietly in his own lap, and ask for nothing more than the wolf's continued tolerance of his presence. I saw what it cost him to hold so still. I saw, too, that he paid the cost willingly, the way I had learned to pay it myself, because some things are only ever won by the paying. "He is not afraid of you," I said softly. "He never was. I think he simply did not yet believe you would wait." Merrick's jaw worked once, and he did not answer, but he did not need to. I understood, in the way one understands weather before it arrives, that something enormous had shifted in him in the space of that single-held breath, and that it had a great deal more to do with me than with the wolf. We tended the pup together after that, the 3 of us forming some unlikely triangle in the dark wood night after night myself, and the King of Coppervale kneeling on either side of an alpha wolf, who bowed to neither crown nor collar. All of us bent toward one small trembling creature that none of us had any obligation to save, and all of us had decided, separately and then together, that we would. I asked Merrick once, in that stretch of easier nights, why a man with a whole kingdom of wolves already loyal to him should have spent 6 years of patience on a single creature who owed him nothing, and wanted nothing from him in return. He was quiet a long while before he answered, turning the question over the way I imagine he turned over matters of state, weighing what was true against what was merely convenient to say. Because every other wolf in my territory bows to me for reasons that have nothing to do with me," he said at last. "They bow to the crown, or to the strength behind it, or because their fathers bowed before them, and it has never once occurred to them to do otherwise. I have never known, in the whole of my life, what it would be to be trusted simply because I was patient and steady, and had earned it slowly, with nothing forcing the matter. I think I wanted, more than I ever admitted even to myself, to find out whether I was capable of being loved for the plain, unglamorous work of showing up, rather than for the office I happened to be born into." "And now you have your answer," I said, "though it was never truly your patience that won him. It was mine." "That is not quite true," he said, and there was no wounded pride in it, only a rueful honesty. "You taught me how it was done. I do not think I would have known to try it your way if I had not watched you first. Whatever trust that wolf has given me, I owe the shape of it to you, even if the hours were my own to spend." I did not know how to answer a thing so plainly, generously said, so I only nodded, and let the fire of the low moon and the sound of the pup's small snoring breaths fill the silence where words might otherwise have gone. The pup began to stand on the 16th night. It took 3 wobbling steps toward the flat stone where I always left the water, and it was the black wolf who nosed it upright each time it stumbled, patient in a way that did not match any story I had ever heard told about him in the village square. "They will not believe this in Coppervale," Merrick said, watching. "The wolf that broke a trapper's arm for coming near its territory, gentling a lost pup like a nursemaid." "Perhaps they never understood him," I said. "Perhaps he was never cruel. Perhaps he was only waiting for someone who did not want anything from him." Merrick turned to look at me for a long moment, and in the moonlight his face had lost every trace of the composed authority he wore like armor in daylight. He looked instead almost young, almost unguarded. "I do not think that is only true of the wolf," he said quietly. I felt the words land somewhere beneath my ribs and did not know how to answer them, so I busied my hands with the water dish and let the silence hold what I could not yet say aloud. We fell, in those middle weeks, into a rhythm that I did not examine too closely for fear of frightening it away, the way one does not stare directly at a bird that has only just consented to eat from the hand. I would finish the day's work among the hives and the goats, and as the light went long and gold across the western ridge, I would walk the same worn path to the tree line, and more nights than not I would find Merrick already there ahead of me, having ridden the long way round from his own hall rather than send a rider to fetch me the shorter way, though he never once said so outright. I learned the small things about him that no story in the village square had ever thought to mention: that he took his tea without honey, though he kept bees enough of his own to sweeten every cup in Coppervale; that he had a scar along one knuckle from a childhood dare involving a nesting hawk; that he asked after my grandmother's bees with a genuine curiosity that had nothing performed about it. He was, I began to understand, a far quieter man beneath the armor of his office than any tale about the untamed black wolf had prepared me to expect, and I found myself, against every sensible caution I had built my solitary life upon, glad of the walk to the tree line for reasons that had less and less to do with the wolf each night. It was on the 20th night that everything changed at once, the way a held breath changes all at once into either relief or disaster. We had grown careless in our safety, I think, or not careless, but comfortable, 3 creatures who had built a fragile truce out of nothing but patience, and truces built that way can feel sturdier than they are. I heard the underbrush crack wrong before I understood what it meant, a heavier tread than any deer, and then the wolf was on his feet with a speed his healing ribs should not have allowed, a sound tearing out of him that was not quite a growl and not quite a warning, something closer to an alarm bell struck by a creature who had appointed himself sentry over more than one small pup now. A second wolf broke from the tree line, larger, paler, one ear torn ragged at the tip, A stranger to these woods, with the wrong-footed hunger of an animal that had wandered too far from wherever it called home and grown desperate along the way. It went for the pup. Everything after that happened in the space of perhaps 3 heartbeats, though I have turned those 3 heartbeats over so many times since that they feel now like they lasted an hour. I do not remember deciding to move. I remember only that I was between the pup and the stranger's teeth before thought caught up with body, my arms thrown wide the way you'd shield a child from a falling branch, useless and instinctive both. What happened next happened too fast for my eyes to properly hold. The black wolf was past me before I finished the motion, a streak of night-colored fury that struck the stranger mid-lunge and drove it back and away from all of us in a tangle of snarling and snapping teeth. And Merrick was there too, no longer a man in any sense I could name in that instant. I do not know how else to say it except that the air around him had changed, had gone taut and dangerous. And the stranger wolf took one look at what stood over me, and turned, and fled into the dark without a backward glance. Silence came down over the clearing like a dropped curtain. I was on my knees in the leaf mold, my heart slamming so hard I could feel it in my teeth, and the black wolf turned back to me at once, nosing at my arms and my shoulders with an urgency that had nothing left of caution in it, checking me the way he had checked the pup on the first night I had found them both. And I understood, with a certainty that needed no translation, that I had frightened him badly, that in throwing myself between a stranger's teeth and a pup that was not even mine, I had very nearly given him something to grieve. "I am well," I told him, my hands finally finding his ruff, and for the first time in 20 nights I let myself touch him without waiting for permission first, because I understood now that the permission had already, quietly been given. "I am well. You did not lose me." He pressed his great head against my chest, hard enough to rock me back on my heels, and stayed there, and I felt the tremor running through his whole body slowly, slowly still. The pup, unharmed but shaking, pressed itself into the narrow space between my knee and the wolf's foreleg, and for a moment none of us moved at all, 3 creatures breathing hard in the settling dark, none of us quite ready to trust that the danger had truly passed and would not double back on us out of the trees a second time. It was Merrick's voice that broke the quiet, and it did not sound like a king's voice at all. "Verity." I looked up. He had not moved from where he'd stood between me and the fleeing stranger, and his face had gone pale beneath its color. His hands, I saw now, faintly unsteady at his sides. This man who did not tremble, who had never once, in every story told of him, shown fear in front of another living soul. "When that wolf came for the pup," he said, "and you put yourself in its path," he stopped, started again. "I have led men into battle. I have stood against threats that would have broken lesser alphas. I did not know until this moment that I could feel fear like that, not for myself. I have never once felt it for myself." He crossed the small distance between us and knelt, so that we were of a height, so that nothing stood over me at all, and when he spoke again his voice had gone rough and low and entirely unguarded. It felt as though the ground itself had tilted, as though I would have torn apart anything in the world that touched you, and beneath that, underneath the fear, something else. As though a name had been written on me my whole life in ink I could not see, and only now, watching you stand between that wolf and a stranger's teeth without a single thought for your own safety, has it finally come clear enough to read. I could not speak. The black wolf's head was still heavy and warm against my chest, and Merrick's eyes held mine with an intensity that asked nothing and demanded nothing, and simply laid the truth of itself bare between us, the way I had learned, across 20 nights, to lay nothing but patience between myself and a wild thing that needed to choose trust on its own terms. "I am not asking you for anything," he said, echoing, I realized, the very thing I had said to the wolf on the very first night. "I know what it is to want something from a creature that has never been given the choice to want it back. I will not be another cage dressed up as devotion. But I needed you to know what I felt. in case it changes nothing else between us tonight but this, that you are known to me now, in a way I do not have adequate words for, and I do not think that knowledge will ever again let me go." The wolf lifted his head from my chest at last, and looked between the two of us with those flint and amber eyes. And then, slowly, deliberately, he lay down at my knee and set his great head across my lap, as if satisfied that whatever had needed deciding had been decided, and had no further opinion to offer on the matter. "I do not know what to call this," I admitted, my hand still resting in his fur, my voice unsteady in a way that matched the king's had been. "I only know that when you say it, something in me answers the way a held note answers a struck one across a quiet room, not loud, not sudden, just true, the way two things that were always meant to sound together finally do." Merrick's breath left him slowly, as if he had been holding it since long before that night, since long before he had ever seen me kneeling at the tree line with my hands open and empty in the dark. "Then let it be called nothing yet," he said. "Let it simply be. I have waited 6 years for one wild thing to trust me on its own terms. I find I do not mind waiting a while longer for this, if that is what it asks of me." I laughed, unsteady and startled and glad all at once, and the sound of it seemed to loosen something in his shoulders that I had not realized, until it eased, had been wound so tight. The pup slept between us that night, curled small against the wolf's side, and the wolf slept too, eyes closed for the whole long stretch of it, the way Merrick told me he never had in 6 years of careful watching, and Merrick himself did not sleep at all, but sat close enough that his shoulder rested against mine, and neither of us moved away from the warmth of that, and neither of us needed to name it to know it had already been named. By the 30th night, the pup ran on 4 sound legs, chasing moths in the moonlight with the reckless joy of a creature who has forgotten it was ever broken, and the black wolf let it wander further from his side each evening, though his eyes never left it entirely, the old vigilance worn smooth now into something more like tenderness than fear. He let Merrick close, too, in those last weeks, not all at once, the way trust rarely arrives all at once for any creature wise enough to have learned caution, but by degrees, the same slow arithmetic I had used on him from the start. Merrick, for his part, never once tried to hurry it. I watched him kneel night after night at a careful distance, patient in a way I do not think the stories of him had ever captured, and I understood that whatever he had been before I came to this wood, he had let himself be remade a little by the same lesson I had learned from bees and frightened animals, and now, it seemed from him, that the things worth keeping are never taken, only ever given in their own time on their own terms. There came an evening near the end of that stretch, when the black wolf did a thing he had never once done before, not even in the earliest nights when I had thought I understood the whole of his nature. He left the pup dozing safe against a bank of moss and came to lie down between Merrick and me, so that his long body touched us both at once, a black bridge of warm fur and steady breath, joining two people who had spent a season very carefully not saying aloud what had grown between them. Merrick went still as stone. I felt my own breath catch. "I do not think," Merrick said at last, very quietly, so as not to disturb the wolf's easy wait, "that he has ever done that for any other 2 creatures in his life." "Perhaps he has never before had 2 creatures worth doing it for," I said, and Merrick's hand found mine across the wolf's back, careful and warm, and neither of us moved to let go for a long while after that. The pup found a place among Merrick's own pack before the first hard frost, taken in by a nursing mother who had lost one of her own litter that spring and had milk and warmth to spare. The black wolf watched it go with a stillness I had come to recognize as his particular grief, brief and complete and never spoken aloud, and then he turned from the tree line and came, for the first time in all our nights together, all the way to where I stood, and pressed his head once against my hip, and walked with me a little way toward the lights of the village before peeling off into the dark of his own ridge, unbound, unowned, exactly as free as he had always insisted on being. I did not see him every night after that. He did not need me every night after that, and I found I did not need to be needed by him in order to have loved the strange, quiet privilege of those 30 nights, kneeling in the cold, learning patience from a creature who had never once asked me to hurry. The village heard of it within the week, the way villages hear of everything eventually, and I found myself an object of a curiosity I had spent 7 years carefully avoiding. Old Mr. Pharaoh came to the cottage gate himself this time, hat in hand, to ask whether it was true that the untamed black wolf had let a woman set a splint on a stray pup with his own great head resting beside her hands the whole while. I told him it was true, and he shook his head slowly, as a man does when the world has quietly rearranged itself in some fashion he cannot quite account for, and said only that his own grandmother had always claimed the wildest creatures could tell a gentle heart from a grasping one faster than any person could, and that he supposed he ought to have believed her sooner. I did not correct him, though I thought privately that it had taken rather more than a gentle heart. It had taken 30 cold nights of kneeling, and saying nothing and wanting nothing, which is a different and harder thing than gentleness alone, though I understood why the shorter word was the one that traveled. Merrick found me at my own gate 2 evenings later, still in his riding clothes, dust of the day's ride still on his boots, and he did not come with any of the ceremony I imagine a king might be entitled to when he arrives to ask a woman something that matters. "I have spent 6 years," he said, "trying to earn one wild wolf's trust by force of patience alone, and I did not understand until I watched you do it in a season that patience was never meant to be a siege. It was meant to be an offering. I would like to go on offering you the same, Verity, for as long as you will let me, and I promise you now what I could not have promised the wolf, because you are the one soul in this territory who has ever taught me the difference. I will never once mistake your staying for something owed to me. I will only ever call it a gift, freely given, and try, every day after, to be worth the keeping of it." He shifted then, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw the king of Coppervale look uncertain, the way a much younger man might look, standing at a threshold he badly wants to cross and is too honest to pretend he does not. "I am not offering you a crown," he said. "I have watched what a crown does to the people expected to wear it easily, and I would never ask that of you unless it was a weight you wanted to carry for its own sake, and not because you felt it was owed to me for anything I have done or said. I am only offering you this, a man who has learned, finally, how to wait for something rather than simply take it, and who would like, very much, to go on learning that lesson from you for the rest of his life, at whatever pace you set." I thought of the first night, kneeling in the dark with my hands open and empty, asking nothing of a creature too wounded and too wary to be asked anything at all. I thought of how very little I had done in the end except wait and stay, and let something wild decide, in its own time, that I was safe to come near. I thought, too, of how strange it was that the very same patience I had spent on a wounded wolf had somehow, without my ever intending it, built a home in me large enough now to hold a king as well. "Then come in," I said, "and I will put the kettle on, and you can tell me properly, since you never have, what your own mother used to call you before you were a king at all." Something eased in his face that I do not think had ever fully eased in it before. Not once. Not in any story anyone in Coppervale had ever told about him. And he followed me through the gate and did not once look back toward the ridge, though I think we both understood the black wolf was watching from somewhere in the trees, unseen and unbothered, the way he watched over every small thing he had finally, quietly, decided was his to guard.